And you're welcome back. We'll be taking you shortly to Parliament, but before that, the G20 Summit is underway with the world's largest economists meeting in Bali, Indonesia. The war in Ukraine, its global consequences, and the increasing competition between Western countries and China make these G20 a particular one which has a lot of challenging matters coming up. For insights into how the gathering is being viewed from Europe, let's now turn to William Bluecroft, reporter with our partners Deutsche Welle in Berlin. So, William, let's take it off from the top of the issues that countries like Germany want addressed at the G20. What's that priority for instance, a country such as Germany? You can hear me. I'm just asking about the priority.
For countries like Germany is Ukraine, Russia's war in Ukraine. Now, Indonesian officials who are hosting the G20 said they didn't want to make the G20 a Ukraine summit. But nonetheless, and of course, Ukraine played a very large role and took up a lot of space in the G20 conversation, especially given the recent apparent rocket launch to Poland that allegedly killed 2 Polish people. It's still being clarified what exactly happened there. President Joe Biden saying it might not have actually been a Russian rocket, but nonetheless a cause for grave concern that actually interrupted some of the G20 discussions for an emergency NATO meeting regarding that incident of that rocket a launch or the rocket landing on the Polish side of the border just across from Ukraine. So Germany and its Western partners did get what it wanted. It seems that the communique that is going to be coming out of the G20 will be harshly criticizing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Remember, Russia is part of the G20. And another thing that Germany got is a declaration of against nuclear weapons, to make very clear that nuclear weapons in general, and specifically in regards to the war in Ukraine, are absolutely unacceptable. Now, it's probably unlikely to get full agreement of all the partners in the G20. Again, Russia is part of the G20. However, Western officials have expressed actual surprise that many of the other countries in the G20 are willing to go along so strongly with a condemnation of the war in Ukraine. And, of course, a prohibition or speaking out against any use of nuclear weapons.
We do know that Germany appears to be at some sort of a crossroads in its foreign policy, especially with regards to Asia. Can you tell us more about its trying, to position itself in terms of the foreign policy matters?
That's right. Germany, for a long time, has viewed itself purely as an economic power, looking to do business, looking to do trade with countries all around the world to do what's best for the German economy. Remember, the German economy is very dependent on its exports, so it needs to do strong, brisk business with all kinds of countries, especially big powers like China, to do what's right for its own economy. But more and more, Germany is under pressure from its European allies, from the United States, from NATO, to view the world in a much more holistic, a much more comprehensive perspective. That it's not just a way to make money, it's not just an economic question or a business question. There's also geopolitical, geostrategic, defense issues that Germany needs to step up to its place in the world, not only as an economic power, but as a power in all sorts of ways. And that is the pivot that Germany is trying to make, especially when it comes to China. Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, saying that he wants to view the Asia-Pacific region as more than China, not necessarily decoupling from China. China is Germany's largest goods trading partner in the world. But diversifying and looking to other countries around Asia and really all around the world, including parts of Africa, where it can do not only business, but see itself as a bigger player.
And for the parts of the world not directly involved, for instance, in the G20, why does this summit actually matter?
Well, the G20 is, of course, the largest leading economies in the world. It represents a huge amount of total global trade, total global GDP, and I think about something around 60% of the global population. So that's a lot of the world, but it's certainly not the entire world. And yet, if we just use the example of the war in Ukraine, for example, there are many countries not at all involved in the war in Ukraine, certainly not in the way that Western countries are. Nonetheless, the war in Ukraine is gravely affecting everyone in the world when it comes to food prices, when it comes to energy prices, when it comes to inflation. So just to use the war in Ukraine as an example, what happens in other countries affects places, even if they're not directly involved. And with the G20 having so much sway over global matters, over global trade, if the G20 speaks in one voice or almost in one voice, it can have serious impacts on also countries not directly involved, but involved as partners.
William Glucroft with our partners DW. We're grateful for giving us some updates.